The Vancouver Entrepreneurs Forum is Vancouver's premier networking forum for technology entrepreneurs. I'm just going to ask that everybody check their mute button, please. Founded in 1988, so maybe even older than some of our students that's on the line today, VEF has been bringing together entrepreneurs and investors alike to cultivate meaningful connections and create conversations and stimulate ideas. We normally host about 8 events per calendar year, and our season generally kicks off in September. My name is Erica Pretorius. I'm the technology industry leader at Deloitte and a proud board member of the VEF for the last 5 years. If you haven't done so already, please join and introduce yourself on the Slack channel. The link was sent out along with the Zoom link that you got either end of day yesterday or today. So please do that and join the conversation there. And if you misplace the Slack link, just reach out on the chat window and we will post it there. VEF is pleased to provide free and discounted tickets during this time of physical distancing. We want to thank everybody that generously paid for their tickets. We are a non-for-profit, so your contribution is very much appreciated. VEF is a non-for-profit and fully volunteer organization, and none of it would be possible without our the extremely valuable contribution of our executive members and all the time and energy and passion that our board members bring to the organization. So virtual hand to all of our volunteers. Thank you. Okay. Our agenda for today, after I conclude the opening remarks, we'll be hearing from 2 lightning pitch companies, which I'm very excited about. It's definitely one of the most fun aspects of VEF events, is learning about what new and innovative companies are coming up the ranks. After that, we'll hand over to our panel discussion. We'll have a QA session, audience QA after the panel discussion, and then we will be following that by some kind of exciting new networking that we're going to try for the first time. If you have questions during the QA part of the session, please just raise your hand in Zoom or type it in the chat window. Next, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Our title sponsor is Innovate BC. Innovate BC connects BC tech innovators to government support and funding resources. Thank you very much for your contribution to the VEF. CIBC, I don't think they need any introductions, but it is important to point out that CIBC's innovation banking offers growth financing for Vancouver tech companies. So please join me in thanking them. And then we've also got seasonal sponsors, Corporate Recruiters, Faskins, Douglas College, Vantage Capital, and WealthBar. Thank you for your immense contribution to our programming this year. And then lastly, we've contracted to New Ventures BC for our delivery services partners, specifically for event management for the VEF. New Ventures BC is a non-for-profit that supports tech companies across the province. They're well known for their annual New Ventures BC competition, but they also run an accelerator program and administers the ISI grant program. Today we are joined by Michaela, who will be lurking in the background for the entire meeting and supporting us. Do you want to say a quick hi, Michaela?
Hi, everyone. Looking forward to meeting you on Slack. Thanks, Erica.
Thanks. So she'll be making sure we don't run into any technical hiccups and also help us with the QA later. Thank you so much. Okay. Now to our lightning pitch part of the event. Vancouver Entrepreneurs Forum kicks off each event normally with a series of lightning pitches from entrepreneurs leading early stage companies, high potential innovators, or non-for-profit organizations supporting entrepreneurs. Presenters are given 100 seconds to promote their venture, funding initiative, or collaboration goals. First up, we will have Jeff Fawkes from Flashana. Stop sharing. Okay, Jeff, if you want to share your screen.
I'm Jeff Fox, CEO of Flashana Technologies. Supply chains for retail businesses which deliver products to their customers have been disrupted. Stores have been shuttered, customers entering premises reduced, and direct-to-customer delivery is the new normal. A poorly maintained inventory is every retailer's worst nightmare. Not only does it lead to a loss in sales over time, but also represents a poor indicator of inadequate demand for a product. But how does a buyer predict the demand chain when they can no longer rely on the old normal of historical buying patterns? There is now an opportunity to explore and redevelop inventory management to optimize the inventory shelf sell cycle. Flashana is solving this problem. We are creating a cloud-based, easy-to-use solution for small and medium enterprises who now need to adapt very quickly to reduce customers visiting their retail locations, and instead a large number of customers ordering their products online and in quantities never seen before. Our technology is a demand forecasting solution that will ingest sales and distribution data and provide an easy-to-use reporting solution for our first target market, the alcohol beverage industry. We analyze and model statistical data and look for patterns and correlations. Using our proprietary machine learning algorithms, we give retailers the prescription they need to unlock their data and predict their demand. We're Flashana, and we make data intelligence and business insight simple for you.
Hi. Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Dan, over to you from Omni.
Thank you very much. My computer actually disconnected and I just got back. So you can hang on for 1 second, please. Oops. There we go. Is it showing up okay?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Dan Leonello, I'm the CEO and founder of Omni Technologies. And unlike others, I guess we've been deep into supply chain for the last 4 years and really building supply chain resiliency. The problem we've been working with is that businesses shoulder the costs of miscommunication and outsourced manufacturing by currently using fragmented tools like email, Excel, spreadsheets, WhatsApp, WeChat, Slack, phone, and some are even still using fax, believe it or not. Our solution is that Omni is a cloud-based and network collaborative supply chain management platform that allows the information, communication, and quality between outsourced manufacturing partners. And it results in a more resilient supply chain. How Omni works. Omni, it collects all the information, all the agreements are centralized and made visible through a design review, RFQ, orders, logistics, and quality management. Every member of your team can use the platform to manage and oversee different portions of the production cycle. The users invite their vendors and or customers to collaborate with their manufacturing partners anywhere in the world, creating a transparent network of manufacturers with deep visibility into their entire supply chains. The team, we've put together a team of passionate experts in manufacturing, logistics, finance, sales, and marketing with SaaS startup experience. Domain expertise, the Omni platform was developed over the last 4 years and built on the foundation of 30+ years of global manufacturing and outsourced experience. It is now in the beta stage and has been launched. From a financing perspective, the project has been primarily self-funded. $800K was raised last fall and is still in the bank, and we plan to do another larger raise later this year. For more information, please call me, contact me at dan@omni.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Excellent. So if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then I can share mine again.
Probably help you, wouldn't it? Just 1 second. Actually, can you keep it up? Never mind.
Nice try.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Dan and Jeff. And if anybody has questions for them or wants to reach out, you can do it via the chat, or I'm sure they will stick around for the networking at the end as well. So now we're right on time, and we're going to move over to the networking part of our, sorry, not the networking, the panel part of our presentation today. I'd like to introduce Mark Woods from Deloitte.
Fantastic. And many thanks, Erica. And I've got to say, Jeff, Dan, a lot of the conversation, I think, on our panel discussion, it goes exactly to what you were talking about, that visibility, transparency, collaboration. So I thought they were absolutely excellent demonstrations. So thank you for that. So as Erica said, my name is Mark Woods. I am a Deloitte partner, and I lead Canada and Chile supply chain service for Deloitte. I'm really pleased to be here and delighted to be joined by three distinguished panelists. That's Mark Goss, Director for Corporate Supply Chain in Seaspan, Barry Katz, the Senior Director for Supply Chain at STEMCELL, and Leon Gaber, the Provincial Lead and Supply Chain Coordinator at BC Government. So I will set the stage for this supply chain discussion, which is again focusing on how supply chain organizations will look to recover in this pandemic and then thrive in the new normal. Then each of the panelists will introduce themselves and provide some perspectives of their organizations in more detail before we have time for to have a discussion and answer questions. So as Erica said, please do send those questions in as we go. Okay, so I mentioned that I was the lead for Deloitte Supply Chain. I have over 25 years of experience helping supply chain organizations transform their supply chains. I've got that across industry, from oil and gas to high tech to healthcare, government, from multinational companies to smaller private companies. As you can tell, I started in the UK and spent significant time in Europe, Asia, and Africa. A couple of years in Russia, 12 years in Australia, and most recently 5 years in Canada. Most recently, I've been working with the Canadian government, working both at the Fed and the provincial level, helping looking at their demand projections and supply of PPE and critical supplies. And we'll provide some, Leon will provide some more perspective of that shortly, I'm sure. So setting the stage for how supply chains are managing and moving from the respond to the recover to thrive. And Erica, if you could go to the next slide, please. So at the moment, most companies are looking beyond this respond phase to actually working and understanding and focusing on that recover phase, ensuring that companies are getting back to work in a safe and productive way, and that the companies are learning and emerging stronger. One of the key things we talk about when we are looking about that back to work is that, I mean, we're talking about staggered return dates, how companies are bringing their people back into the workplace in a safe way, understanding guidelines and protocols at a federal and a provincial level, and what are the sort of allocations and prioritization between federal government, between provincial government, and between companies. How are the allocation of PPE? Who's going to be doing the buying of that, the PPE and critical supplies? What is the prioritization of that material? It was interesting. I was actually on a call last week with the CEO of Suncor, Mark Little, and he was talking about, they were talking with government about PPE and how there was a remote communities were going to be running out of PPE. And one of the questions that they were trying to get over is they have excess PPE equipment, and how do they get that out there? And there's a lot of to and fro between the government and Suncor and what they could do about it. And in the end, Mark said, well, look, we'll just take our corporate jet and actually fly that material to those remote communities to ensure that they had a continuity of supply. So that was an interesting one about how corporations are working with government, collaborating, and trying to ensure that we are continuing to respond in the correct way. And I thought that was a fantastic example of a large corporation doing that. If we look beyond that, and if we look at supplier risk as, you know, one of the key things, and I think it was mentioned earlier, both the financial, the operational, the corporate social responsibility. I was actually, last year, Deloitte had a survey, a global survey with about, I think it was about 3,000 corporations. And it found that the P2P implementations, 80% of companies had P2P implementation, which was you know, transforming the business, but they only had about 33% of supplier risk management. So they really weren't focusing on that area. And 40% of those companies were still very much siloed, not collaborating, even internally, let alone looking at that end-to-end supply chain. So I think the conversation around supplier risk, understanding the supply chain, making sure that the supplier risk is becoming a lot more important, not just cost and efficiency. So I think there is definitely a change in the values that corporations are looking to this respond phase. And then if we look at the next phase, and Erica, if you can move to the next slide, where we're going into the thrive phase, how do actually companies, we're getting back there, oh, going back to, thank you. How do actually companies, you know, take, you know, thrive in the new normal? What are they going to go from a defensive play, which is responding to the current environment, to actually to that offensive, really taking it to the next level and changing the model and actually transforming their business? And I think one of the things that we're seeing is thinking about, are companies going to be actually reshoring, or, you know, looking at going from basically going from offshore to nearshore, looking at, you know, local and medium and small suppliers versus macro suppliers, looking at alternative sources of supply to reduce risk. Yes, it might increase cost to some extent, but I think we've seen from this pandemic that reducing risk is one of the key things that they're looking to do. And I think we're also looking at, you know, this is an opportunity for organizations to really look about the way they actually transform their supply chains. This is almost the black swan of what, you know, of the opportunity to actually become digital, automation, IoT, really moving from sort of central command centers to central orchestration of the end-to-end supply chain. And really, as I said, transforming their supply chain. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm going to hand over to Mark to start with, and really talk about your experience in terms of where your organization is in terms of respond, and then looking at thrive.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. Nice to meet you all virtually. You're going to go from one Mark from the UK to another Mark from the UK. So apologies about that. You're starting with two English accents here. So I am the Director of Corporate Supply Chain at Seaspan. Been at Seaspan just over 7 months now. Seaspan as an organisation, it's an amalgamation of 6 slightly smaller companies. We kind of split it into marine and shipyard. On the marine side, we have kind of the essential service side, which is tugs and barges and bringing things into Vancouver Harbour and escorting them. We have a ferry service that makes sure that all the goods and services that are, all the goods that are needed in Vancouver Island reach Vancouver Island safely. And then we have a petrol bulk company on the marine side as well. And then we have 3 shipyards, 2 in Vancouver and 1 out in Victoria. Just to carry on from where Mark set off, my background, I've been in procurement for 23, 24 years now. Similar to Mark, I've worked across multiple sectors, from construction to telecoms to asset-based companies, retail, banking sector, the list goes on, and internationally as well, mainly in Europe. So obviously UK based in the main, and then spent time in Sweden, France and Germany on various projects. And as I said, I'm 7 months into the role at Seaspan and also 7 months into Canada. So we brought the family over in November. What my focus has always been is kind of on transformation of procurement functions. So that's really what I'm here to do in terms of transforming the Seaspan supply chain. And I guess COVID has added another dimension to that transformation. We've kind of done things, I guess, two lines of attack. One is around the supply chain, and one is just around operating as an organization. I'm sure lots of people on the call have had the same challenge. When it all happened, we very much focused on kind of the here and now. What do we need to do to just to keep the organization operational? And we kind of split it into office-based staff and operations-based staff. So the office staff, fairly straightforward. We have all become incredibly talented at using Zoom and GoTo and Microsoft Teams, and we've kind of established as an organization that we can offer the white collar workforce remotely, and I think that will have some changes going forward. The bigger change for us has been around the white collar. So if you can imagine a big marine and shipyard based company, we have operations, welders, blasters, all sorts of kind of very manual activities that we have to deal with. So a lot of the focus has been on how we ensure that we keep those safe, first and foremost. So there's been an awful lot of communication with these guys and girls in the yards that we have, and building trust that we're keeping them safe, and their health is paramount to us has been really important. Mark touched on PPE. We've had to work hard, as I'm sure everyone has, to make sure that we've got the right PPE. And I think within that, we've faced that question of, yes, we need PPE to operate, but there's probably others that need PPE more than us. So you kind of come into that ethical question of, we need to run yards, but actually the health services, first responders are more important. So, we've had to allow certain products that we would expect to come through to us to go and make sure that they actually get to the right organizations. And in doing that, you start to unearth innovation and creativity as you start to seek out new ways of operating. On the supply chain, we've taken a deep look there for what are our most critical supplies to keep the operation running. And sometimes it's the smaller things that can keep operations running. So I'll give you an example. We all knew and we're all fully aware that we had to PPE up everyone to make sure that they didn't transmit COVID or even risk getting it. And that was a risk that if somebody actually got COVID in one of our yards, it would shut it down. It would be as simple as that. 600 plus people just sent home until we'd cleared that all up. But actually, there's certain supply chain risks that could shut down the shipyard as well. So we have a number of trades that need to use respirators, and they have these little things called pancake filters that go in. And it's kind of standard for our guys to be wearing these. Massive worldwide shortage of pancake filters. So, we had to start thinking differently how we categorized our kind of the SKU lines that we brought into the yards. We had to think about how we get further upstream. So rather than dealing with distributors, maybe it's time to start dealing with the 3Ms of the world, so on and so forth. We've found that communication is actually increased with our supply chain. So, we stopped waiting for the monthly get together with a supplier. We're talking to them daily and weekly, particularly for products that are critical to our supply chain. And then, like everyone, we have started to come back, but we're at maybe 30%. We put a lot of thought into it. We've got all the signage that you could possibly think of. We've got more sanitizer than I could believe we would ever bring onto site. And I talked about innovation as well. I mean, who would have thought that the alcohol that we may be drinking around Christmas and New Year would be the alcohol that now is provided by distilleries into new kind of sanitizer solutions. So we have all sorts of kind of stuff to make sure that the office place as we come back is exactly where it needs to be in terms of safety. And what we've really tried to do on that plan is make sure that we mirror the guidance from WorkSafe BC. So, we feel like we're in a good place. There's definitely things that we can learn. We keep reaching out to industrial hygienists to make sure that we're not missing anything. But yeah, we've kind of moved through that initial phase, Mark. So
fantastic.
Hopefully that's okay.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Mark. And it was really interesting what you said about understanding your supplier. And on that survey that I was talking about, it was I think it was about 65% of CPOs actually said that they had no vision of the second tier of suppliers or further. So they only had that for the understanding of the visibility of the first tier. So it's very interesting having to go back into that supply chain network.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark, for that. Barry, please, would you like to talk about your organization and how you're coping?
Absolutely. Thanks very much. My name is Barry Katz. I'm the Senior Director of Supply Chain Operations for STEMCELL Technologies. I'm responsible for global procurement, planning and inventory, distribution, logistics, and order management. And STEMCELL is Canada's largest biotech company. We help scientists doing research for cures for devastating diseases such as cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and infectious diseases such as COVID-19. One of our products was actually used by the CDC in China, the Center for Disease Control, to actually sequence the gene and the DNA of COVID-19 that was then sent around the world to researchers to further on and try and come up with vaccines. We, as a company, we develop and commercialize reagents, tools, and instrumentation that researchers use in their labs to develop downstream applications for science, and then cures, which then go to pharmaceutical companies for development, commercialization, and distribution around the world. Our tagline as a company is scientists helping scientists. I'm not a scientist, and many people in supply chain are not, but I say we are helping scientists help scientists. And our goal is to further the pursuit of scientific discovery wherever it is around the world. We are a company of about 1,500 employees. The head office is in Vancouver. It's a Canadian company, started and continues to operate in Vancouver. We do 98% of our manufacturing here with one CMO in the United States. And then we distribute to 7 stocking locations around the world in different countries for other regions. As well, we also have distributors that cover a far-flung number of end users all over the world. We cover over 100 countries around the world. And I can echo a lot of what Mark said just about, about the supply chain itself and some of the issues that we were having, continue to have, obviously. We as a company went live with SAP last July 1st. And so we're now, I guess, 11 months into a whole new ERP system. And I don't know if anybody has done this or has worked for a company that went live with SAP. It's not a cakewalk. It's not something that you enter lightly at all. And we thought it was the hardest thing we ever did as a company. The hardest thing I've ever done, in supply chain. It was extremely transformational for supply chain, all of our operations around the world. One of the most impactful things we ever did, and typically takes a year or two to dig yourself out of and really start to optimize the systems and be able to use it for efficiency. So we were, 7 months into SAP, just sort of getting our feet under us, thinking nothing could happen to us now that would be harder than coming through SAP when really COVID hit. It was, again, one of those things that just one thing after another, you never think that you're going to hit something as hard as this. And I think it was, easier for a lot of companies in a way that nobody had to think about it earlier. Nobody had to plan for it because it wasn't a thought. And so you couldn't overbake it, you couldn't overthink it, you just had to react. And a lot of the things I think that we're going to take forward in a supply chain is that resilience and being able to build a resilience into a supply chain that can handle anything, and you don't have to plan for it, have plan A, plan B, plan C, because you don't know what's going to hit you. And one of the good things about, I guess, this in the long term is that the profile of a supply chain industry and supply chain itself, I think, has been elevated to the boardrooms more than I've ever seen it before, elevated to the C-suite. I couldn't tell you, I couldn't mention a friend of mine who knew what supply chain was about. If I said I was at a party and said I work in supply chain, I couldn't find anybody who understood it. They would normally nod and then go off and talk to somebody else. But now, you know, it's the darling of all the industries, and it really does elevate again that profile for what we do as an industry. And it has turned us, I think, especially in our company, has turned us from one of looking at cost cutting and just-in-time inventory and you know, taking pennies out of transactions and being really, really lean and efficient, to one of accepting risk on a greater scale. And really, it's about risk management and business continuity for us going forward. The cost structure, if you look at anything you can do to strip costs out of your supply chain and add it to the bottom line of the operation, is great. But if you're not prepared for that next pandemic or that next whatever it is, it doesn't matter how much cost you pull out of the company, because it's going to come back tenfold. Trying to recover from something you haven't built resilience into. You need to be responsive, flexible, and then afterwards figure out how to make it efficient. And I think those are sort of the key things that I've tried to build into our supply chain, and I will take with me even to a greater degree now that we've been through something like this. So I think every company that, you know, has a product that they have to move, they have to make, buy, transform, and move anywhere and sell, has a supply chain which is more integrated now around the world than I think we ever thought it was. Mark, you were originally talking about, you know, thinking about coming onshore or near shore as opposed to offshore. You know, a lot of people, and me included, where you don't really think about it, 95% of our raw materials are purchased and sourced from the United States. But 75% of the materials that go into those products that we buy are offshore. And you're not dealing just with your supplier. You're dealing with their suppliers and their suppliers, and on and on. And unless you've got a good network and you're collaborating and you have trust, you can't take enough cost out that would allow you to sleep easy at night. You've got to build in risk mitigation factors and be thinking what might hit you down the road at all times. And so this is it's been a really interesting last 4 months. When you think about it, it really only has been about 4 months since this has come on the world stage. And that's the other thing that kind of hit me, is that how fast something like this can affect all of us around the world, and how, again, resilient you need to be able to recover from it.
I think you're absolutely right, Barry. I think supplier risk is big. I mean, as you say, supply chain has become, you know, a household name and become a seat at the table on organizations. And within supply chain, supply risk has been the key thing that everybody's talking about. How do you minimize that risk? And thank you very much for that. And then I'll hand over to Leon, last but definitely not least, to talk about the leading the work of the Provincial the supply chain coordination unit for BC.
Great, thanks a lot, Mark. Hey, everybody. So different situation than Barry or Mark here, obviously working with the province. I have about 4 months of knowledge of supply chains, as many folks do, I think. So I was, when the province declared a state of emergency as a result of COVID, we also the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General established what's called the Provincial Supply Chain Coordination Unit. And I was asked to lead that program. And really that program, the unit, the intention of it is to support and increase resilience of supply chains in the face of COVID. So I'll tell you, not having had any previous experience in supply chain or supply chain management, this was all obviously new to me, and frankly, it was new to government. So government, the province has never really had much of a role in supply chains. So what we did provincially to respond when COVID hit, and we recognized that there was real risk, particularly to first responders and to the healthcare sector with respect to PPE and cleaning and disinfectant supplies, was obviously to form this unit and then very quickly do a lot of work to increase the province's intelligence about supply chains. Again, having very little background information about it, this was something that was primarily left to the public sector, the private sector rather, previously, and it worked, right? The just-in-time model of supply chains works very well when things are good. So we began by monitoring very closely many different supply chains, and that spans from food and sundries like toilet paper and the like, to pharmaceuticals, to PPE, cleaning supplies, things like baby formula. As the pandemic sort of rolled through the world, we saw different items becoming short supply, both globally, but also provincially. So we were having challenges in the early days with some certain types of supplies getting to more remote communities. So we were doing a lot of work, and frankly, a large portion of our work, of my work, frankly, was to create this new unit. So we are comprised of over 100 people within government, spanning several ministries within governments. We created this organization within government overnight to be able to gain this intelligence and to start helping increase the resilience of supply chains. So, those are some of the early things that we did, and we worked very closely and continue today to work very closely with all the big retailers to get that information on a regular basis so we can have that intelligence. Working with all the big suppliers in the province, again, to get that intelligence so that we have that better global view of what's happening with supply chains, where are there risks, and where does the government need to consider using some of our levers to help some of those supply chains if there are significant challenges where we have the ability or influence to make positive change. So beyond just the gaining intelligence, we then started actually acting. So we set up what's called the province's supply hub. So it's a website where folks can go and enter in offers of supplies that they're looking to either donate or sell to the province. And this was all focused squarely on the healthcare sector. So we've had many thousands of donations and offers to sell PPE and cleaning and disinfectant products to the province. So again, those early days were very much focused on making sure the healthcare sector was kept up and running, because we were having global shortages, as we are today in some cases, of PPE. So a lot of effort was focused on making sure there's this funnel of supplies that are bolstering the healthcare sector. And then we also started looking to the private sector to partner with us. And that's where Mark and Deloitte came in here, really helped us to develop a provincial demand model for all these items so that we could get a better understanding of if the province is going to step in to help these supply chains, what are we looking at? How many respirator masks do we need provincially across all sectors if we look at different types of suites of what the pandemic would look like over time. So they worked with us really closely to help us develop that model. They developed it on our behalf, and so we've been continuing on with that model since then. And we also then worked with KPMG and engaged them as well to help us to start being more proactive with those supply chains. So looking, and folks have already talked about this, looking further upstream and upstream, and we went right into Asia and started working directly with manufacturers to be able to get those stable, secure supply lines with quality manufacturers. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. There are huge challenges globally right now with the quality control of many PPE items. And so we had to be, overnight pretty much understand the minute details and specifications of all kinds of different PPE items, what they are used for, what different certifications are. Globally, there's all kinds of different types out there, and really try to cut through what at the time was, a total, and to some extent still, a total wild, wild west in terms of the production of PPE, the selling of PPE in China. I'll tell you, we've had shipments that have been hijacked. We have had shipments that have been confiscated by other national governments. So really wild times, frankly, and trying to push through all that to make sure that at the end of the day, we're actually getting product back to the province to support those healthcare workers. So that was, I would say, some of our early efforts, a very, very busy, challenging time. As through all that work, we were starting to see a stabilizing of supply lines coming into the healthcare sector, and we've since started to expand our lens of who we're supporting. And really, this is also in support of the province's restart plan. So our premier released the restart plan of how the province is going to reopen as we go along in the future here. And a critical, certainly not the only aspect, but a critical aspect of that plan is in making sure that sectors have the PPE, cleaning supplies, and disinfectant supplies they need to support that plan. So that's kind of our focus right now, is making sure that we're supporting that plan, that we don't see sectors who run out of PPE, who are forced to close because of a lack of PPE or cleaning supplies. And to Mark's earlier point about the respirator filters, so we have been doing things like facilitating access to those types of filters for some of the large infrastructure projects around the province, for some of the sectors around the province where there is still challenges getting those types of supplies. So we're in some cases being more active. So we have in some cases taken a more active role to support supply chains locally. So for instance, supplying some of the more coastal communities, more remote coastal communities where there was a real challenge and some of those supply chains were breaking down, the province stepped in and we helped to maintain that supply line, so those remote communities were getting the supplies they needed. But then also to be that facilitator to make sure that different sectors and entities themselves had what they needed, so that we wouldn't see significant shutting down of different either critical essential services or different strong economic drivers in the province. So, it's really the scope of what we have been doing is very large. A lot of our focus is on PPE, but frankly, the mandate that we have is to support all supply chains, all critical supplies. So it's really a large portion of what we have been doing is monitoring to see where there is those pinch points, and then looking at the options that we have available to us to step in and support those areas or sectors where the help is needed. And now we're starting on the recovery phase, starting to look more long-term about, what is the province's role in the resilience of supply chains? And Barry talked about that, the resilience, and that's I think a key piece for the province is how do we ensure that there is resilience in our provincial supply chains going forward, so that we're never in this scenario again, where frankly, we were unprepared, and pretty much every jurisdiction in the world was unprepared for what came. So there are a whole series of things that we could do, but we have to be obviously very mindful and thoughtful to where the province should or needs to step in to help increase that resilience. So a lot of work that we'll be doing over the next while, my team will be doing, is to develop a long-term strategy for the province with respect to supply chains. And we take the broad view of that. So it's not just PPE, it's all critical supplies, and it's all the main supply chains. So within an emergency perspective, there is all kinds of different supply chains that are critical in an emergency. So it's taking a very broad perspective to what that might look like, and can include things like partnering with private sector more deeply to ensure that resilience. It could include changes to manufacturing policy, to provincial stockpiling, to developing programs within government long-term to have this sort of monitoring and sort of leveraging the province's tools that we have available to us to increase and maintain that resilience. So there's a lot to consider provincially, and the scope is quite large, of course, but I'll tell you, it's been quite an interesting ride, and I'm sure it will continue to be.
Well, I've got to say, Leon, thank you for that. And I think you and your team have done an amazing job. And on behalf of Deloitte, we were so proud to be supporting you on the work that you've done. So thank you. We've got some questions here, and I know we talked about resilience and supplier risk, and Leon, you gave some great examples of basically, and I know we've seen that things being actually almost taken by other governments, off the shipyards. I just wanted to get a sense from Barry and then Mark, maybe, in terms of how you see to overcome those risks in terms of coming from that sort of recover to thriving, and how you're looking to overcome that, and what things you're putting in place to make sure that you don't get caught in that issue of shortage of supply.
Yeah, I think and I don't know if it's Leon's fault specifically or his group or not, but when we have a clean room, we have to make our product in a sterile environment. We have a clean room, and we use masks for all of the people working in there. And it was a consumable product that we never really thought of too much until 4 months ago, when at that point, a 30-cent mask, if you didn't have it, you couldn't operate. You're shut down. So for, you're thinking about supply chain and supply chain risk. Back then, it wasn't even on the radar of anybody. And then as we started to try and figure out what was happening, we would place orders and we get, consumable product the next day or 2 or 3 days later. And then all of a sudden, in March, our lead times went to 6 weeks, and then lead times went to undefined. And
that 30% mask became a $3 mask.
It was a $3 or $9 mask.
Yeah.
And a lot of governments were putting it on allocation. They were working, they were stopping shipments coming in from overseas. They were, we were shipping masks and other PPE to some of our staff who needed it in very small amounts so that it wouldn't get confiscated. We were afraid of bringing product in from China, where we had manufacturers make them for us. And they would warn us that it might not get through their customs out of the country. And so all of a sudden, something that wasn't really on the radar when you're looking at risk mitigation and you're looking at supply risk is really there. And I think it just highlights the things that you can't take things for granted at all. And I think one of the things that we've started to do is really go deep. As I said, it's not just your suppliers, but it's your suppliers' suppliers and where they're coming from, and understanding more about the deep supply chain than you've ever really understood before, the specifications of the things that you're bringing in, and the fact that, you've got to do a risk profile of the products you're bringing in. And if it's something that is like a commodity and you can get from anybody, it's likely not high risk, as opposed to something that's a single source, or that, there's a single point of failure. It needs to come through, or be a specific type of product. You're going to have high risk. And we've been building out our inventory. One of, in supply chain loves the absence of volatility. It loves not a lot of variability either on demand or supply. Well, there's always lots of variability on both. And even now there's more variability in demand and a ton more variability in supply than there ever has been. And so one of the only ways to buffer against negative impacts of that is to hold more inventory. And you've got to make sure that you're doing it in a strategic way. You're shoring up where the supply is. You've got to make sure that you're working really closely with your finance team and making sure that you've got the resilience capability built into your finances by way of maybe a small war chest or a war chest that's available to you, where you can invest where a year ago you wouldn't be investing in large amounts of money. But you've got to be in lockstep with them, I think. And so I think it's brought our company closer together. And as we're recovering, we're working on business continuity plans in a way that we never really had before. We were putting business continuity plans together specifically for our insurers who demanded it, the banks who demanded some sort of documentation that you've got business continuity plan. And it was a bit of a chore to do. It was something we didn't really see a lot of payback for, except that they were asking for it. But now it's one of the bedrocks in the company of understanding what we need to do to shore up what might happen, but also working internally more collaboratively, so that again, finance, the banks are there for us. That they're looking for you to be here for the long term. They're looking to make sure that you've taken those insurance policies out internally, and that you've got those plans in place. You've got inventory is not a dirty word anymore. Whereas, we've always been squeezed to hold more inventory, faster turns. That might not be the case anymore. And I'm certainly, there's less emphasis on that for me, but you've got to be strategic about it. You certainly don't have unlimited funding, and you've got to accept a certain degree of risk, but you've got to be really deliberate about where that risk is and where you put it.
And thank you for that, Barry. And Mark, is that a similar for Seaspan and for you? Is there anything different that you're looking to do to reduce that risk?
Yeah, it'd be very easy to say pretty much the same as Barry there. We had the same challenges of we used to have very certain lead times for getting certain consumables, PP in, to you may have it by a certain date, to actually, as you start to manage up the line, you start to say, actually, I can't give you any guarantees of any product coming in at any time. And so where we started to take the conversation, Mark, was around alternatives. Yeah, so your tried and tested supply chain routes right now might not be as secure as you think they are. So we've spent a lot of time on certain products in the main consumables and PPE, because they're the ones that would hinder the business most. We spent a lot of time trying to establish new supply chain routes. And as you kind of follow that thought process through, we'll develop those supply chain routes as well. But, you know, they will now have the potential to be not strategic suppliers, but suppliers of certain bits and pieces to us that we will put ongoing tactical volume through to make sure that we're on their radar. I think the other thing that we've had to get a lot better at, and I'm not suggesting anyone's great at this, is forecasting. So, and forecasting with an uncertain future. So, you know, we've started to talk about forecasts that certainly in the space of consumables and PPE are probably 6 months long. Not in terms of lead time, but we need to make sure that we've got 6 months worth of product, critical product available, because when COVID-20 and 21 and 22 comes along, we want to make sure that we have enough product to keep, first of all, our operation running, but most importantly, we can still deliver for our customer base, because they're the guys that are asking us to deliver. We've started to look a bit more, and it's just recent, we've just started to look a bit more strategically at inventory management. And that is cross-company. So rather than ferries looking after its inventory and tugs looking after theirs and shipyards looking after theirs, actually, we need to put a much bigger Seaspan hat on, collaborate a lot more as an organization, and accept that we're all in this together and we need to help each other. So we've kind of done all of that, and we've touched on this a few times, just the importance of getting upstream. So, and twinning it in with that forecasting. So again, just to give you an example, Mark, you know, historically we buy a load of PPE, as a lot of people do, via the Webers and the Grangers of this world, and they're doing as good a job as they possibly can. But actually, the only way we got some of the conversation moving was by reaching out to the likes of 3M and Honeywell, and having conversations direct with key people there to talk about the importance of the product, to give a much better forecasted volume. And, you know, I don't mind sharing, but all we're trying to do is get Seaspan as high on that list of product suppliers we can. We fully accept first responders, healthcare, other provincial, you know, important parts of the province will take, you know, first dibs, and we support that. But we want to be the second. We want to be very top of the next branch down. So, you know,
is that a hint to Leon there? Is that just in terms of, you know, prioritization when we're going forward? Absolutely.
No, we fully support what Leon's doing. I mean, and we've taken the moral view as well, Mark, where we've gone, actually, we accept there's people and industries more needy than we are right now. So, you know, we will happily divert certain products to the health services, for example. And what it's done is it's, you know, driven us to think better about our consumption. So, you know, we've got operational managers who are much more interested in supply chain to kind of Barry's point. We've got VPs much more interested in supply chain to Barry's point. And we're getting them to think about how they consume. So, you know, when COVID came along and hit the yards, people were, you know, taking as much PPE as they possibly could need. They were using things that would last a week and using it, you know, different fresh product twice a day. So we had to go into education mode as well in terms of the life of this product, the need to extend the life of the consumables that we're using to keep the yards open, being brutally honest about it. And we then get into kind of the behavioural bit of, you know, looking after ourselves and looking after each other. One of the things that we've been really big on is teamwork and support for each other on these things. So that's kind of come into it as well. But it's a very similar message to the group as Barry's given. It is identify what your critical supply chain products are, risk profiling them. What are they? What's the impact if we didn't have it? what alternatives exist, how can they put the right inventory and contingency in so that when this happens again, and we believe it will, we're at least in a decent place.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a number of very good points, but the two are like is getting those demand projections and also making sure, and I think it goes back to Leon's point about making sure we're never in the same position again. And I'd like to just touch on that with Leon, if I can, just in terms of, making the decisions that you're making. I mean, these are, large scales across organizations, across industry. How accurate is the information that you're getting? And how do you ensure that you can make it as accurate as possible to make those informed decisions?
Good question, Mark. So, and no disrespect to you, Mark, or Deloitte, but so Deloitte, I said it already, Deloitte worked with us and helped us and built a provincial demand model for PPE and cleaning supplies for us. And I always say every model is wrong. The question is how wrong, right? So how accurate is our information? It's not accurate, frankly. And the challenge is, for us, particularly at a provincial level, it's very, very challenging to get information from across the province, from across think about every sector out there. But not only to get that information, but have it to be A, accurate, and B, up to date on a regular basis. So extremely challenging to have from a provincial perspective, a global view on supply chains, the health of those supply chains, the demand, where is supply able to meet demand? Very, very challenging to do that. And frankly, my expectation of the level of information, the quality of information that we get is low. So whenever I'm briefing executive elected representatives, everything is prefaced with these are broad brush strokes, and we cannot expect to have that real detailed information. And so what that means is we have to make decisions at the front end about, and to your point, I think, the decisions that our unit makes are impactful decisions. So they have significant impacts on the province and on the ability of the province to be operating, different sectors to be operating. So we make explicit decisions all throughout our sort of decision-making framework to be conservative wherever possible. So if we think that, a sector has X amount of usage of something, well, let's increase that by 25% just to be safe. If we think that there's probably enough supply coming in of a certain PPE, let's assume it's not, and then let's look proactively, globally, to see whether there's a way that we can bring that supply in to bolster that supply. To Mark's earlier point, where he's working with 3M and wanting to be the highest on the list as possible. The challenge is every country in the world is doing the exact same thing. So just to think about, an example of N95 masks, that is the one thing which everyone in the world wants. It's the one thing where, at least early on in the COVID response days, everybody and their dog thought they needed an N95 mask, frankly. And they didn't, but we didn't have a lot of information. There was a lot of fear. And so that was the expectation of everyone. Well, there are very few places in the world where it is produced because of the components that go into N95 masks. And then just think about what happens when the country of France goes to China and makes an order for 1 billion N95 masks. And think about the implication that has globally on not only the supply, but the expectation of manufacturers. So all of a sudden manufacturers are saying, well, hey, I don't need to be supplying this, whether company or a small jurisdiction, because I can go, and these countries are now competing against each other to take up my entire manufacturing capability and capacity for the next 2 years. So that becomes, on the global stage, very challenging to be able to make informed decisions and have accurate information, because things are moving so quickly and you're dealing with such uncertainty on that global stage. And at least from my perspective as a small global jurisdiction, trying to increase and support our province's supply chains, it becomes extremely challenging to do that and make accurate and informed decisions, because there is that global competition happening and things are changing so quickly. Like, you know, I would just come back to Sunday, where, you know, there is this mentality or mindset that we are sort of coming out of the response phase into this recovery phase. Well, Sunday was the single highest day of new cases globally since the pandemic started, right? And so, you know, that makes you think, okay, well, where is it happening? Well, just think about whether Beijing just closed their airport to international flights recently again. And so just think about the knockoff effects if China goes back into another, you know, outbreak phase, what that's going to do to global supply chains. Supply all across every single point along a supply chain, stockpiles have been depleted. And I, you know, I've got lots of examples where, you know, critical like life-saving supplies, you know, all kinds of different items, because of the way that the COVID hit over time and the way that supply chains are working internationally, stockpiles have been depleted, and there have been these waves of what would have been shortages. Luckily, China reopened soon enough to stop that shortage hitting most of the world. But it's resulted in, all the way along the chain there is no more stockpiles to be had. So we are at a very critical time in my mind about our the fragility of some of those supply chains. And so being able to make those accurate decisions and forecasting, it's, you know, very, very challenging right now, I would say.
And I think, you know, all of us have been talking about, you know, resiliency, risk, reducing risks, you know. I just wonder, to get your final thoughts, I think we're just about time now, or just over time. You know, we've sort of moved from supply chain being, you know, looking at efficiency and cost effectiveness to resilience. You know, we're saying it never happened again. What are your thoughts in terms of the longer term? Are we going to continue as, you know, supply chain risk and visibility is going to be top of mind, or do you think it's going to move back into cost and efficiency? And Mark, I'll ask you that question.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Mark. I think in the short to medium term, it's going to be absolutely front of mind for people. So I think people are going to be worrying about supply risk. Organization, CEOs are going to be worrying about supply risk, making sure that there's resilience in that supply chain, because nobody wants to see supply chain stop the production line running. You know, Barry, in the work that he's doing on STEMCELL, he can imagine one component not being available. So I think we'll go into probably an unusual period, certainly for British procurement folks who are used to having to drive hard to deliver savings and savings and savings. And then I think a little bit longer term, it will balance itself out again. So I think human nature will kind of kick in and go, look, all of a sudden we seem a little bit more stable, and particularly if we don't have another big pandemic, I can see it swinging to, yeah, let's start to drive costs down. But I think I'll pick up on something that Barry said as well. I think once we have started to build resiliency into our supply chains, I think the obvious next step for us is then to start thinking, well, how do we now build efficiency into those resilient supply chains to do it better and more cost effective? And I think, Mark, you'll come across some, you know, great entrepreneurs, great innovators who are going to come up with some, you know, incredible ways of doing things and tools and pieces of software that are going to help us, going to make us think differently. And I think that will help drive efficiencies in the long term. And, you know, I look forward to seeing what those, you know, those new ways of working will be. So yeah, it'll be front of mind. We'll be very resilient for a period of time, but I think over time we'll move back to efficiency.
Fantastic. We've got about 20 minutes left, I think, for audience questions. So are there any questions from the audience that we have? Erica, do they just type in here?
Correct. They can type in, or if somebody wants to get off mute, I think everybody has that capability. You're welcome to ask it in audio version.
I think I did see a couple of questions come through on the chat. There was a few chats that people had typed in.
I've got one here for you, Barry, actually. Consider that you're a supplier of a fairly unique product. Have you had to define a way to prioritize your customers? So how is this affecting your customers?
Yes, of course. I mean, as a customer ourselves, when we looked at some of the critical raw materials that we were buying, we were put on allocation, and we were considered an essential service because of the products that we were able to supply to the research community. So that did help, but they had to prioritize us in their profile as we have to prioritize our customers as well. You never want to short a customer. You want to make sure all the work that they're doing is the most important work specifically for them, but you never know, what might come of that in terms of scientific knowledge down the road. And you do, we hope not to have to short customers, but you need to work with them very closely. Where we were having customers, typically buying 6 months to 8 months worth of material from us, they wouldn't mind even buying, 1 month at a time, as long as we could guarantee to them that we could continue to supply to them. So I think if you could, you worked really closely with some of your key customers, much more collaboratively than we've probably ever seen before. We've always been, and I think any companies like this, we incentivize companies to buy and bulk up on product. We give them incentives, we give them discounts to buy more and more. If you'll buy 6 months or 10 months worth of product, we'll give you a discount on that. I think that's a backward way of thinking about it. I think everybody wins when you can come to an agreement and collaborate with your customer base, where if they buy just what they need, you'll have enough for everybody. You'll have the freshest product, as ours has a shelf life. You'll have the freshest product that comes out. You'll be able to guarantee people that product as it comes through, instead of having the big spikes of demand from specific customers and they're bulking up and you get that whiplash effect or that bullwhip effect. And if you can smooth that out, then everything becomes much more efficient. But in times of crisis, yeah, you do need to work much more collaboratively with your customers. Make sure you've got the product for them. But typically they're very understanding. If you're running low and you can guarantee them, a fresh batch that's coming out or more product that's coming out in a month, and they can take a small amount now, they would be much more appreciative. You being open to them, trusting and having that open relationship, rather than not having enough for them or putting them on some sort of indefinite, waiting list. That unfortunately we had to see that, in the last couple of months. But I think it's normalizing a little bit. But I think Mark is right that, and Leon, that the stock levels are low. We're kind of normalizing, but we're normalizing in today's world. And if the next wave hits and it's what some people are saying might be even bigger than the first wave, then I don't think we're set up for that, right, around the world. And so I think we're going to come back into this again and again over the next, probably over the next year.
Yep. And I think it's very interesting, Barry, that you're talking about security of supply and making sure that your customers have trust in that security of supply. Yet what we've just talked about in terms of the supply chain is not having that, so having to increase inventory levels and actually increase that bullwhip effect. Sorry, Mark, did I cut you off there?
It's okay. I was just kind of seeing some questions and some thoughts came to mind just around. And I think Jeff may even have put something just in terms of the chat around, developing analytical capability to predict what the future might look like. Now, I know that's a really difficult thing to do, but, there's plenty of pieces of software out there that look at kind of what if scenarios and how we deal with them. So, we're just starting to look at exactly that. How do we get, first of all, good reporting, then good analytics, and then move into the more predictive analytics. Now we're a mile away from them, but I think that's where supply chains need to start to think and spend some time. So, anybody out there who's got that kind of service or software, I'd love to hear from them, because I think it's going to be really, really important to supply chains going forward. Data's our lifeblood. It really is. And I've worked with companies, Mark, where if you can give your best and furthest out best estimate of a forecast, that helps that manufacturer as well. That kind of helps keep their lights on in the factory. And I take the point that Leon said earlier that, compared to maybe some of the governments around the world that are ordering things, if I can give a better forecast with better certainty of when I want it, where I want it, and in what delivery schedule, we become a fairly easy to do business with customer. And we might not be buying as much as some of the governments, but we're easy. We're easy to work with. We're predictable. And that, you know, there's some benefits to come with that.
And I think you're absolutely right in terms of that predictability, you know, making sure you've got that certainty. And also when you get into that, you know, machine learning, analytics, I think getting into that sort of predictive understanding of your demand and also your supply and visibility aligned to that is absolutely where you're going. And I think, Leon, that's exactly what you were looking to do within the sort of the BC province, getting some of that and using predictive analytics to, you're saying any plan, you know, is never right, but trying to get as accurately as possible that information.
Yeah. So, you know, I think, so just looking at some of the other questions, someone asked whether other provinces have a similar unit to us. None, I think, in the same kind of level of being proactive as BC is. So others have been doing different things, but the scope of what we are doing, I think, is broader than any other jurisdiction that I know of in Canada. But what I will say, I guess, is if I were to have a crystal ball, and so I've seen this on a number, my career in the public service, I've jumped in all kinds of different files over the last decade. And I've seen this in a number of areas, and I suspect this is going to be the case with supply chains as well, is that, and we don't know what it looks like right now, but I suspect that this new normal, whatever it's going to be, will have a significant, some kind of significant role by governments. So, you know, the whole sort of deregulation, just-in-time model of supply chains, I think there's going to, my guess is, and I really don't know for sure, but my guess, if I were to guess, is that governments around the world will start taking a significantly more active role in supply chains. What that looks like, I don't know, frankly. But I do think that, you know, an example that I'll use, and just as an analogy, this is on a previous file that I was working in, where it's all about professionals and how professionals operate. So, you know, whether it's doctors, engineers, foresters, whatever the profession is, there is whole sets of governance models around how those entities operate. And there's been a whole series of, in BC here, things that happened that resulted in the province saying, okay, it's time for us to take a look at this model to see how it's working. And what came out of that is to say, okay, the model's not dead. It will continue on, but there needs to be a shift in the mindset, and there needs to be more active role by government in making sure that, you know, and I really see the analogies here to this whole resilience and cost idea. There needs to be more active role by governments to ensure that you're not just considering cost. They're also considering those broader factors, and that governments don't just let that market, or in this case, supply chains, work unto themselves. So if I were to guess, I could see long-term governments around the world saying it's time for governments to have some sort of active role in the short, medium, and long term, because I think, Mark, to your point, you know, I kind of laughed at, you know, I think human nature will do exactly what it does. We'll all care for a while about this. And after a while, if there's not another pandemic, we'll say, hey, let's go back to where we were, which is things to be as cheap and as quick as possible, which then puts you right back in the same problem as you were before. And so that, I think that's going to be a big conundrum for governments around the world to try to wrestle. And I'm sure everyone will do it in a different way. But my guess would be that we're not going to, long term, we're not going to see the same kind of scale back towards the old world of, you know, that just-in-time production kind of mindset.
And interesting, Leon, when you're talking about governments being much more involved with the supply chain, are you specifically talking about sort of critical supplies, or are you seeing that extended to a lot more of the sort of, you know, overall manufacturing?
I think, so I think, again, this is going to be something that every jurisdiction will come up with their own solutions. But, and that's where, you know, we're in an interesting, all countries will be as well, but we're in this interesting situation as well, where there's a whole bunch of stuff the federal government is doing. provinces are doing their own work as well. And then, so we could very well see, you know, collaborations across multiple jurisdictions, so multiple provinces, maybe parts of the US as well. It's hard to say where it will go, but I think all bets, all options are on the table at this point. So whether that means, you know, jurisdictions saying, hey, we want to have some level of domestic manufacturing security for these items, and it could be for the PPE, but take the broader view. So what are critical supplies to Canada's economy? Taking that broad view to say we want some level of national or jurisdictional security, there's a whole bunch of ways you can do that. And like I said earlier, could it be from manufacturing policy, you know, supporting different local manufacturing capabilities, to provinces saying we're going to stockpile this stuff, to provinces or other jurisdictions or federally to say we're going to put direct resources into making sure that we have a continuing line of sight to the health and resilience of these supply chains, so that we don't ever get into this situation again where we're sort of caught flat-footed. And that's just a couple examples. The list of things that provinces, jurisdictions, nations could do are long. There's lots of tools in the toolbox, I think, to try to address that, and everyone will do their own thing, will have their own approach, I suspect. But I would be surprised if the result was governments would go back to saying, okay, let's let the market do what it's going to do, and allow it to, you know, find that highest level of efficiency, because it creates risk and vulnerability.
One of the questions I thought was really interesting is that we're talking about the shortage, you know, seems to have made everybody more sort of creative and looking for unlikely alternatives. The question is, anything that positively surprised you? Barry?
Well, I think what surprised me is I think the opportunity that all of this has created. And I think Mark had mentioned earlier about alcohol, where you had breweries, you know, manufacturing hand sanitizer, and you know, people and entrepreneurs will and should always keep their eyes and ears open for what they can do with what they have and where those opportunities exist. And I don't think anybody would have guessed that was even in their future. If they were, you know, manufacturing beer and all of a sudden they're turning some of their machinery into manufacturing PPE for some reason. And there's a huge market for it right now. And it might even take them down, you know, a separate company, and then all of a sudden they've got two streams of revenue coming in where they only had one before. I think this type of thing just the opportunity always exists, but it you know, accelerates it and puts it under a microscope, where you can really move into other areas or you creatively solve your problems and create opportunities for yourself, much more than I think in any other time. When there's disruption and upheaval, there's a ton of opportunity. Some of it, there's also, you know, the bad to that, but if you keep your eyes open and can be creative and be open to new things, I think you can take advantage of things that you never would have thought of earlier.
Fantastic, thanks, Barry. And same question, Mark.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to build on what Barry said there, because it kind of made me smile when it happened. So when we were talking to distilleries, we thought we'd really kind of hit on the answer. So it's like, you know, this is superb. Distilleries are going to send us 200 litres. In fact, we thought they'd send us nice little hand bottles, and then actually you realise they're selling it in 200 litre drums. So you kind of get into, actually, we needed to think this through a little bit more. And then you kind of go, and that's okay, because we'll use all the dispensers that we used to put the more jelly type sanitizer in. And so you kind of pour it into you know, those bottles, and you realize it's just pouring out. It's pouring out. So there was some unintended consequences of some of the innovations that came through, in that for a little while they became unusable until we kind of found different dispensers to deal with the sanitizer. I think the other thing that kind of came through is people's individual ingenuity as well. You just saw lots of people thinking about face masks, and just the ability for the collective of the organization to put its brain power together to solve the problem kind of came through as well, when we were feeling we were short of certain products. we just got a plethora of people saying, have you tried? Have you considered? You could do that. If you put that with that, we could resolve it. So, you know, I give you another example. When I talked about those pancake filters, they're a very particular sort. They were a worldwide shortage. But actually, you know, when you re-engage the shop floor, so to speak, and say, how do we resolve this? There were other solutions which were, you know, put in this filter with this cartridge actually delivers the same effect, so we can kind of keep on working. And that wasn't per se a new supplier coming up with a new innovation to solve the problem. That was just ingenuity and good thinking within our own collective organization. So I think we forget that we can engage people and get their thoughts and ideas to solve problems. And I think I saw a couple of those, certainly within Seaspan, where, you know, production-minded, technology-minded guys and girls were solving problems and keeping the operation running. All of them small little things, but all of those small little things aggregate up to a kind of a big win that just kept the yards working. So
I think that's a really good point. There's tons of brain power in every organization that unless this sort of disruptive activity happens, you don't typically tap into or think that you need to tap into it.
Yeah.
And if you could use that resilience and use those resources within your company and create a way to keep cultivating that, I think you're a stronger company going forward. And I hope that we all learn from that.
I think that's very true, Barry. I mean, we always talk about, you know, any supply chain transformation. You know, you were talking about earlier about SAP, implementation of the SAP, and the challenge is not the system itself. The challenge is almost the change management to get the people, the process, the capabilities, the governance to move forward to, you know, better ways of working, leading practice, whatever it is. And the system's not just an enabler. So it's the real challenge is that, you know, to transform, to change people's view. And I think a disruptor like this does that. And it's been, you know, I think so many times in supply chain, we've been looking to challenge, you know, companies and organizations and people to change. And they've said, well, we've always done it this way. Why do we need to change? And the fact is, this is why we need to change.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you typically find, you know, disruptions in certain industries at certain times or certain regions. This is the first time, certainly in my life, and probably everyone here, where there is a disruption in every industry, in every region around the globe at the same time. And again, you know, it just, I think it pulls everyone together. You start seeing all of these weird, you know, products that start to pop up all over the place that you can use, or you could, like, it's an interesting, opportunistic time, I think, for a lot of people. If you think about it, you know, with the glass half full, it's really interesting, especially for supply chain. I think people working remotely, this is something that we never really considered as a company, yet it's working. We kicked everyone out of the office except essential personnel for manufacturing and warehousing and distribution. And we didn't, you know, particularly want to go this route. We've always sort of talked about, should we allow people to work from home? It's worked fabulously for us. And it's allowed a lot of people to work kind of longer hours with less stress. It's allowed them to spend more time with their family. It's working. And we're taking advantage of a lot of technology now that's out there, like Zoom and different things like this. And Dan, your product that you know, all of the technology, I think, that is coming out, and that we'll probably accelerate what we're doing and how we're working in different ways than it would have if we were all just making that trudge back to the office every day, all day. There's a lot of interesting things that are going to come down the pike, I think.
I think there's an important point there, as Mark. We very similar to Barry's organisation, being a firm that doesn't particularly encourage working from home, and so the pandemic has forced us down the working from home route. And we've established that, you know, no surprise, we can all work remotely. We can use the great technology that's out there. But actually, it's started to drive thinking a little bit further, which says, actually, we should continue doing some of this as we go further. And then for a company like Seaspan that's based on the North Shore of Vancouver, we're kind of going, actually, sometimes all of those bridges are a barrier to join our company, because that hour and a half or that 2-hour commute, do you know what, I'm not sure that job's quite worth it. So we've started to look at it and go, actually, if we better adopt technology, if we actually have a proper working from home policy and way of doing things, our ability to attract the best talent to our organization in the fields that we're used to operating in is enhanced. You know, if we say to people, you've not got to do that hour and a half commute every day, you just got to do it twice a week. Our feeling is people will be more open to that style of working than presenteeism, which is, I need to see you at your desk because then I know that you're working. So just in the past 4 months, our whole attitude as an organization has changed, and now we're coming through it and seeing the benefits of attracting the best talent that we need to do the jobs that we've got. So yeah, it'll be, the new norm will be different from, you know, where we were just post-Christmas.
And I think
Well, I was just going to say that you can consider, Mark, like sourcing skilled labor. Again, relocating people is super expensive. You got to, and attracting them to come to Vancouver from somewhere in the world, you no longer have to do that. All you need is a computer, and you can be working from wherever you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was just going to mention on talent and supply chain. I think supply chain, again, it goes back to supply chain was, I think, seen as a back office almost, you know. Procurement was seen as purchasing, you know, it wasn't seen as a, you know, a sort of a cutting edge, you know, function to go into. And I think that's changed a lot in the last 4 months. And a lot of people have, you know, talked to me and talked to Deloitte about how can they get into the supply chain function, because it is seen as so critical and, you know, changing the world that we live in.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. But ironically, we're just recruiting for a couple of roles that traditionally, I'm told, we struggle to fill. Our applications have just gone over the 100 mark. Now, that's not to say they're all the right people, but the guys in the team said, we've never had that response. And I can't help but thinking that what has happened and the way maybe the profile of supply chain has raised in the past 4 months, it's just front of mind for people. Yeah. You know, it's an interesting sector. It's an interesting profession. I've done it for over 20 years like you. I think it's a great place to work, and you get to work with lots of different people. You know, people skills are just as important in my world as, you know, having great analytical skills.
No, I think that's absolutely true, Mark. I think, you know, supply chain truly changes business and organization in the world, and especially now in the world we live in. And I think that's a great place to finish. I think Erica's sort of changed the screen. I think that was a hint for us to stop, I think.
That's all I have.
Thank you so much. I mean, we could go on talking about supply chain for a long time. I know. I really appreciate it. You know, Barry, Mark, Leon, really appreciate the time today. And thank you for everybody for the questions.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for allowing us to come. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody, and thanks Mark for your flawless moderating there.